Chapter 1 of the Behind the Seams iconic costumes collection, starting with the notebook dress. Here I start with the draping and patterning of the muslin.
Essentially, we're going to take our front blocked out muslin piece, and I've already put all the measurements into the fabric that I need to pay attention to. So I'm just going to grab a bunch of pins here and my scissors. Because what's super important is that we line up our straight grain and our neckline points here. At this front point here, there's a little nail or pin, and then you have your center front going all the way down to the bottom. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin here at the first mark that I made and kind of place that in there. And then I'm also going to cut this out so that our neckline can lay better. And then I'm just going to line up the straight grain with the center and also match up my hip or my waist to my waistline here, and also set that pin in there. So for this design that I'm doing the notebook Allie Hamilton's blue inspired dress, and this is a very, very simple draping because it's a sheath and it has two princess darts here, and the sleeve is already set in to this shoulder here with the full bodice. So really there's only two pieces, essentially three pieces, because this will be our buttons here, and then we have our other side, and then the back, which is going to be cut on the fold because it is one piece. It does not have a seam. So what you're going to end up doing is you're going to be opening the front closure here. There was quite a bit of research that I had to do with this, but it is very simple, and we'll just continue pinning along here. Up where we left off, we are going to continue to drape our front bodice for our notebook dress. And I did do a lot of research on this, so we are going to pretty much look at the movie stills that I captured and the images that are available. The front is pretty much photographed the most. You can see here is a great example. She has the princess seams and then just the seam here, and then obviously the center front as well. So we're going to follow this guide and we're going to do that exactly over here. First thing we'll do is we will start at the shoulder just to get the neckline laid down here, because this needs to be all pretty much flat, so we will do that. See, now once I start cutting into this, it will become contoured to the neck, and then we can start laying it nicely up to the shoulder, as you can see. See, now this is not as puckered, and we'll just place a pin here. You can see it's still a little puckered right here, we're just gonna keep clipping in until it starts to lay even more flat. Which is perfect, just like this. You don't want to go too far, that way you don't miss where the actual line is for the neckline. And I'm just going to kind of adjust this again, just so that we get it really smooth and really flat against the chest area here. So now you can see that this looks great here. We are still lined up. We could probably even put just another pin here, and we'll put another one down here. Now that is absolutely perfect. So the next thing we'll do is we'll continue kind of smoothing out on the shoulder here. And now I've already pre-placed my pins for the armhole. If we were doing a sleeve, these would be super important. Because the sleeve is already set in with the bodice of the dress, we're just going to leave that, but we do want to make sure that we pin here before it turns into the shoulder. So you can see on my shirt here, this is where it would be before the armhole turns into the actual sleeve part. So I'm going to mark this actually here. And then I'm just going to carefully, with my fingers, feel where the rest of the line is, and just place another pin there. So now we have this part. I'm gonna leave this excess because this is gonna be where our sleeve is, and we're gonna kind of determine that as we go along. So next important step is to kind of keep moving down the bodice, and we hit the bust area. So this is the fullest point on a female figure from the waist up. This does mean that because there is a lot of tension in here, when you try to lay this fabric flat, you get a lot of excess. So this could possibly be a dart, or if you were doing a more fitted corset or top, you could put princess seams in here to relieve this. But because this is a 1940s styled dress and a sheath styled dress as well, we are going to actually want to have a little bit of room in here for ease, as well as for the darts that have to get put in here to make it look replicated from the movie. So I'm just going to kind of carefully smooth this out. This line here is super important. This is our waistline, so we need to make sure that this line continues straight across the whole side of the body, because this ensures that our fabric is on the grain. If you start pulling like this to try to keep this smooth, you start to warp where the waist grain line is, and the fabric can become janky or stretched out in ways that you don't want it. So really, you just have to carefully come over, place it as much as you can until you can kind of reach the side. And right now, this is what mine looks like. And I'm just going to carefully adjust here because it's not quite lined up where I want it. And we'll just kind of move it up just a little bit. And that's perfect. So I'm going to actually kind of set this in here just like that. Now, to help ease some of this tension that we have, we're going to take our scissors and we're going to cut right in here. Now, this kind of helps to relieve some of the tension that we have going on, but we still want to make sure that we can reach our side. Now, some might ask that you put a dart here as well to kind of keep it fitted, but we're not going to do that. Excuse me. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of keep moving this until it is exactly smoothed out. So now from this angle you can tell we have quite a bit in here, and what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 pinches. I'm going to place another pin in here so that way where our fabric does not move, I'm going to take 2 pinches. This is going to create our dart. You want to be kind of close to where the fabric meets the princess seam. And I can feel that my princess seam is right here. So I'm just going to take 2 equal amount of pinches and just place a, I don't know if you guys can really see that, but another pinch. Oops. Let's try that again. So 2 equal pinches, and you're just going to carefully pin your pinch here and pin and pinch. Now we will fix the correct adjustments for these. Once we true up our pattern, because when you look at the photo, I believe there is 2. If there wasn't, then it's okay. It does look like there's 2 on this pre-made one. Let me find a better version. Yeah. Well, actually, there might be just 1. It's kind of hard to tell. This photo is kind of choppy. So just give me 1 second. Okay, well, after looking up a couple videos, the best picture that I can find is this picture here. Now, it looks like this could be an extra dart, or it could just be fabric that was gathered inside when the belt was cinched, but this for sure is a dart. I know that because I saw in other video clips that that was a dart. Now I've seen other people make this and they have 2 here, maybe because they've looked at this photo and assumed that was that. So I'm not sure. Maybe we'll put 2 in just to kind of follow and make sure that there's plenty of enough gathered here, which, feeling how this is, I think that's what we'll do because there's quite a bit of fullness still here. And in that case, we'll just kind of keep plugging along. So I'm going to tackle this as the last part, but when you do the skirt as well, you want to make sure that your fabric is still lined up. I do have a there should be a hip line as well. I did not draw mine in, but you should definitely draw it in. But I know because of doing this for quite a while that the fabric, I can see the grain line in the fabric and I can tell how it needs to be straight. And then you just kind of keep smoothing stuff just to make sure that everything is really nice and flat and exactly how it should be on the body as well. So I'm going to raise this just a tiny bit, and we're going to try and tackle the armhole. So now on this, the sleeve is already set into the bodice, and essentially what needs to happen, I have to get this fixed because this keeps falling down every time I turn it. Like that. Okay. So this is going to be sort of like a set-in sleeve, or excuse me, not a set-in sleeve, a kind of like a raglan sleeve or a kimono style. Now hers only does come down to a natural stopping point. And this is why I have my trusty mannequin arm. So I'm just going to put this on, just put this underneath what I have going on right now. Make sure that it sits nicely here. Now, if you're doing any of these things at home, you really want to make sure that without a mannequin, your arm is straight, not pushed back, not too slunched forward, just at a very natural posture. That way you get the most accurate measurements. So I'm going to re-put this up here, re-pin down my points. Make sure that everything is smooth. Now there is a little bump here from the arm where it straps. That is totally fine. It'll get trued up once we take this off of here. So essentially what you're just gonna do is you're just gonna kind of play around with how you want the shape, but make sure that because this is like a straight sleeve, it's going to come down here. I'll show it this way. It's going to come down like this. You want to make sure that this is still straight going down as well. That way, when you sew it, it's still going down the center as if this line here was going to go right down the middle. Because if you skew it, your seam is going to be skewed. So I'm just going to kind of draw where I want it. And I'm going to just kind of pin carefully here, because we also still need to accommodate for the side at the same time. See, now you can see that this is forming very well. Now this is going to kind of get cut just a little bit there because your underneath arm has a circle that goes all the way around. I'll kind of show you. So if you raise your arm here, kind of comes to an angle, and this on here is still attached. So we want to make sure that we have movement for our armhole. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of move the arm out of the way a little bit. And I'm going to start finagling, making sure this is straight. With the side seam. Now you can kind of pull a little bit on this side. You don't want to pull too much that you start getting like unnecessary creasings in your drape. So like for this instance, we need to have this kind of smoothed out and kind of move this fullness around. So that it's not all too much in one area and that we're still pretty much straight with this. But we don't want too much because we still want to have a looser fit. Isn't it great? A great example of how to do the sleeve that we're doing, because this is a kimono style sleeve, I would say then, but we're just making it shorter. So you can see here, if we were to stretch that out and then start manipulating where we want the armhole to essentially, and the side seam to essentially meet here, is where we're going to start kind of fixing the drape. This is supposed to be looser. So once we start getting everything adjusted, then we can kind of start going in and fixing our fullness. But I'm going to cut a little bit here just so we can have some ease in this. And now what we probably also want to do at the same time is put our back piece on so we can kind of figure out how we want to do this. Probably should have put that on first, but just getting rough shape of this, okay? And we probably won't go up this far here because we still want to have some movement. So we'll kind of figure out the adjustment once we look at the picture. But let's also start with the back side as well. So we can actually cut off some of this excess here on this. And we're going to just kind of start marking stuff as well.
After I had finished marking all of the points on the front bodice, I went ahead and started to drape the back bodice on my dress form, marking the shoulder seam and the dart intake that was needed for the back side. Essentially, it is the same as the front side. You just have to be mindful of the lower hip area so that you're not pulling too much fabric. Otherwise, you won't be able to sit or move in it. So when you are smoothing out all of the wrinkles, just take your time and be mindful of how you're pulling it and ensuring that your center back is still on that center seam on the dress form. That way you can really tell if you're moving your muslin too much, if it's pulling at the bottom. But in the next part, I do show how I attached the two pieces together so that the seam is exactly the same shape and is exactly the same equidistance from each other. That way one side is not being too much front bodice or too much back bodice. It is exactly where the side seam lines up.
You're going to sandwich these together, and we're going to make sure that our waistline meets with the waistline back here. Now I should have done this to start with because that's a lot easier to do. but you also get a basic idea of how to do other draping. Okay, so we are going to meet these sides up, and you want to have a little bit of ease on this side seam here, so it's not like pulling and stretching in weird ways. But you also want to make sure that you line up your waistlines with the back waistline so that it's even. So you're going to gather both pieces together and make a sandwich like this. And you're going to work your way down and making sure that your seam that you're gathering is lining up with the seam here. So when you pin, you should be pinning so that you can feel the seam underneath. So it should be like that. Oops. Bring it a little bit closer. Here. So I pinned here. Okay, I pinned here underneath. You can feel where the braided part is, where the seam. So you can almost see the outline right here, and my pin is here, so it's on top of that seam. That's where you want to line it up so that your seam is on your side seam. And this part you can play with quite a bit because this determines how much fullness is going to be in the skirt. Now I'm not going to do it super tight. I'm probably just going to do it pretty evenly with the torso bottom, because in the actual dress itself is sort of fitted like a pencil skirt on her torso. Or I should say, it's fitted like a pencil skirt at her bottom. So we're just going to carefully go down and line everything up very nicely. See? Oh, look at that. Here we have our seam. This is where it's going to match. And then as you continue down, this is as high as my mannequin goes. As you continue down, you can see it's still flat here, but it's fitted. Same with the back. it's flat. We're not puckering anymore around the bum, and we're not gapping too badly here. She still has enough room, but it's flat. And it's not being pulled in any different, too much direction. So now because there is a little bit of fullness down here, just a tiny bit, I'm not going to pull it because that pulls the line here off the skew. And we want this to be straight down here. I mean, I can probably take it in just a tiny, tiny bit more. But you also have to remember that you need to move in this dress too. You can't really have anything that's too tight around your thigh or waist, or excuse me, your thigh and around your knee area. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to move in it. You're going to be like waddling along. So I could probably take this in just the tiniest hair, but I really like the shape that I've achieved with this and how it lays here, because this is also going to get cinched with a belt. Now, whether you super cinch it or you just have it as a decorative piece, it's still going to get pulled in around the waist. All right, so now it's time to do the armhole. What we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing. We're going to attach our two pieces together on the back, making sure to line up here, and we're also going to attach here. Now, I believe there is a specific measurement that you stop at. I'm going to stop at the bust point, where my biggest point is on the torso. I'm going to stop pinning just right below this mark here. And that means the side seam is going to end here, but the sleeve is going to start coming out from this point here. That way we still have enough room to lift your arm, even though we're not doing a set in sleeve. As you can see here, it's kind of like starting to create this armhole area.
After I had finished marking that last point on the mannequin, I ended up just finagling around with the sleeve shape and how the shoulder seam is integrated into the sleeve. Especially when you're doing sleeves like this, it is super important to have an arm for the dress form. That way you can really gauge how the shape needs to be, see how much fabric is kind of being taken in underneath the armpit, because you don't want to take too much. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to move your arm, like raise it up and down. And also when you are doing the top part where the shoulder seam does meet into the rest of the sleeve, you want to make sure that you're trying to stay as close to the center as you can without it being too skewed to the front or too skewed to the back, because people can really tell how much is being pulled into a seam and if the seam is straight. So if you're going to be doing a sleeve like this, make sure you have something like that, or definitely test it on somebody. That way you can really measure accurately the seams that you need to do. But in the next video, I do show truing up my pattern and marking all of my points and doing a secondary measuring of the dart intakes for how long it should be. I'm using my French and hip rulers to mark and make straight lines at each of the curved and straight seams. I am also measuring accurately the distance between the center front and the princess seams on both of the front and back bodices to make sure that the darts are exactly where they need to be placed and that they line up perfectly on the princess seam. And then also when I am doing the shoulder and the sleeve hole, I am actually sandwiching and pinning the two pieces together as if they would be sewed, and then doing a tracing so that the exact shape is replicated on the front side to the back side. And this is done just with a tracing wheel and some chalk paper. And also the side seam as well. I'm making sure that that is the exact same shape by pinning and sandwiching the two pieces together and then tracing those as well. So you can see here my hip curve is being utilized, and then I just blend that in with the straight ruler because after the hip it just does go straight down if you're doing a pencil / sheath styled dress. But you can see I am just marking and measuring everything so that it is exactly perfectly lined up with the points from the dress form. After I had finished drawing all of the lines and marked all of the points that I needed to, I then went ahead and transferred all of those to a paper pattern piece, and in my case I was using some cardstock as I had ran out of translucent tracing paper, but I am actually just using my more spiky tracing wheel to draw all of these lines onto the paper. I find that it's a lot easier to see the marks that I have made, and also it gets a more accurate transfer of the lines. And then I just mark all of the lines again that have been imprinted onto that paper pattern with a ruler so that I can actually see them, and then therefore draw a seam allowance. I actually do a 1/2 inch seam allowance on all of my patterns that I make because I think it's a lot quicker to just line up half of the ruler with the part that you're measuring out. And also on my sewing machine, when I sew, the fabric actually matches up very nicely on the right side of the presser foot with the 1/2 inch seam allowance from where my needle is placed, so I don't need to spending the time to measure out the 5/8 and then kind of finagling around on the sewing machine where the 5/8 needs to line up. I actually find it a lot easier and quicker to just do 1/2 inch seam allowance. But I'm actually doing this for both the front and back bodice, and in the next little clip I am making some additional pieces, pattern making, not draping, because I do find that sometimes certain things are a lot easier to make with just the measurements and the paper pattern, and that would be the collar and the little sleeve cuffs as well.
Alright, what I have already gone and done is cut my fabric so that I can line it up on the grain. All I did was just make a little snip into the fabric here past the seam allowance, and then I just ripped it. So it has this kind of like crinkled edge now, but that does mean that when I fold my fabric so that it's cut from end to end, which is here along this line here, it will be on grain, so I don't have to worry about my pattern pieces being off grain and getting all funky once I sew them and actually wear this garment. So I'm just going to basically line up the selvage edge to the selvage edge and lay out my fabric super nicely, and so that the folded part does not have any wrinkles in it like it does now. It's very wrinkled, but I will fix that in just a second here. I have my fabric all laid out nice and flat and lined up. You can kind of see there's some wrinkling down there. I'm not using that part yet because my rotary mat is actually in this little square just right here for right now, but I realized after I had started lining things up, my fabric was extremely wrinkly and I wanted to just give it a quick little press to kind of press out some of those wrinkles. You can still kind of see there's some here and there, but I'm gonna start laying out my pattern pieces, and what I'm gonna do is I'm going to make sure that the line, oh, look at this here. So there's a line at the very end, which is right there that you can see. I'm going to line that up on my fabric, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler and make sure that from wherever the selvage point is to that arrow is the correct amount of length away from where this measurement is going to be. So for instance, if I line this up at 7 inches here across from my fabric, which I won't do because this is a lot of space, I'm actually going to probably push it more up here, so it'll actually be like maybe 1.5 inches, close to an inch, 1.75 inches, so roughly around that space away. But I'm going to make sure that as I move up the pattern, it is still 1.75 inches away, even on my longer pieces. That way I ensure that the grain is still followed throughout the whole pattern. That is really important to follow. I know a lot of people just kind of place their pattern pieces and try to line it up straight, but this is a really great extra step to do to ensure that your pieces are on the grain so that they don't get all warbly once you actually start sewing.
I forgot to mention also, there is a very deep inset line that I'm pointing out here that I'm going to avoid cutting my on-fold pieces on, because I don't want that line to be noticeable either on the center front or on the back bodice, as there is another line right there. Those lines are from the folded fabric being on the bolt for a super long time, and so they kind of accidentally get like steamed, or I would say like pressed into the fabric accidentally. So I'm going to avoid placing my pattern pieces on those lines so that they're in a very inconspicuous spots. And you can see here I am cutting out my fabric and making sure to line it up on the selvage edges, that way it's exactly on grain, and also trying to avoid those deep inset lines that are there, especially on this back bodice piece right here. I have moved it over quite a few inches from the center back point, that way when I do end up ironing that out, it'll be less in an inconspicuous spot and not right on top of the center back, because I do think that it takes away from the professionalism and the overall not integrity, but the appearance of the garment, and I think it just doesn't look as couture as what you spent all that time doing it as. So I'm just cutting out all my fabric and a little bit of interfacing that I had, and then I will go ahead and transfer all of my pattern pieces to my sewing room. That way we can start sewing the project. Alrighty, so it's kind of hard to see, but I did trace all of my darts and the points where all of the specific seams should line up on the garment, but I just used my tracing wheel and some chalk paper, and these are all done on the inside of the garment. That way you don't see the markings on the outside, but because this fabric is super thin, there is a small, you can kind of see a small mount that appears on this side. I'm totally okay with that, simply because this is white chalk paper that I use, so it's going to dust off the more that I handle this, and these are darts, so when I do sew them you won't really even see the points, because it'll be on the inside of the garment. At this point, I had finished sewing the back bodice darts, and when you're sewing darts like this that go into the top bodice and partially into the skirt portion, even if it's a one piece, you want to make sure that you start at the center, that way you can get an accurate sewing line and it's not all finagly and jumbled at the bottom. But here's the finished portion that I had one evening, and on to continue sewing the rest of the seams together for the rest of the dress. So I have sewed wrong sides together simply because I'm doing a French seam on this since it's a very lightweight fabric, and I wanted to have a really clean finish with no bumps at the seam here. So I sewed wrong sides together. So you can see this is the inside of my darts. Inside of darts right there. And now I will press this open so that when I flip this around, I will be sewing right sides together, and then this seam will be hidden in a pocket. Alright, so I have encased the seam allowance in this little sewed line in here, and when I flip this over, all of the seam should be covered, which is perfect because we can't see any of the strays, which means that I sewed exactly where I needed to. For both of these stitches that I did a 1/4 of an inch because I had 1/2 inch of seam allowance, so I divided that by 2, knowing that I had to do 2 seam stitches here to get this kind of burrito encased seam, which is called the French seam. It's a really beautiful seam. I love doing these because, for one, I hate serging and I don't own a serger, so I think doing this kind of seam is absolutely gorgeous, and it lays nice and flat, especially once you sew this down here and cut away enough seam allowance that once you press this fully in the direction that you need to press it, it'll be just nice and perfect, and you don't see such a bulky seam finish at the seam where it connects together the two pieces. So I will be doing that for all of these seams to sew everything together. I pinned the front facing to the right and left side of the front bodice and began to stitch those together. After I had finished stitching them together, I utilized an understitch, which basically you sew on the top right side of the fabric, and then you catch the seam allowance underneath that, so that when you press the facing into the inside of the garment, the facing will actually stay where the seam is, essentially, or where the understitch is, so that way it doesn't roll out and you don't see your lining, or in my case, the facing, as you can see in this video here. Alright, last thing I did to add this facing is just put a nice understitch on top of the facing here. As you can see underneath, I pushed all of the excess seam allowance to the facing side, and then I just stitched really closely as I could to the original seam. That way this catches underneath, and once it's folded super nicely, you won't see the facing or slash lining that's underneath it. I love doing this stitch. I think it makes the garment look super crisp and super professional. So I'm going to continue doing that on the other side and then finish up attaching the seams together. After I had finished doing the front facings, I had then went and pressed some interfacing to my cuffs and my collar to start sewing those together and joining the two pieces together.
Well, I just had the most unfortunate setback with making this garment. I had decided to remove the interfacing because I just thought it was too stiff for this fabric, and just the aesthetic of the garment overall. And while I was removing it, I accidentally seam ripped a little hole into the bodice of the fabric, unfortunately, where the sewing needed to go, so I didn't like that, and I needed to take it all apart essentially, just the front half. This was the piece that it accidentally got messed up. You can see here, little hole right here where it needed to be sewed, and yeah, then it happened again down here. This fabric is really tricky to work with, and yeah, I'm just gonna have to be super careful from now on from what I'm doing. So I have to basically redo this entire front bodice piece, but I'm gonna be really happy with it because I'm actually making it perfect to how I want the actual dress to be represented from the movie. So I'm going to have to crack on sewing as much as I can because basically we're at steps 1 again with redoing this front bodice parts, because I had essentially had the shoulder seam all finished, and then I was starting to sew the side seams together. Yeah, so I'm essentially gonna have to re-sew on the front facing part and get back on it. So we will see what I can do in the next coming hours or so.
At this point, I basically had to redo the entire front bodice and do a lot of seam ripping and a lot of sewing to catch up to where I had originally left off the previous night. But yeah, that was definitely a learning curve. Don't be too quick with your seam ripper, and just be careful when you're redoing stuff, because in my instance, this fabric was very thin to work with, and it was very prone to ripping at some point. Not that I knew that it was going to, because I was being careful, but just be careful with your fabrics, you guys, like, for real. Don't do what I did. Do what I did to make sure that you want to have an awesome garment by taking things out if you don't like them, but be careful when you do.
It is exactly 2 a.m. and I just fixed everything I needed to fix, and I literally can't believe that this is turning out so great now. I'm actually really more impressed with this version that I did than the first one. But you know, okay, little sneak preview. Stop. I'm literally so obsessed with how this is turning out, and I managed to figure out how the cuffs are going on. So if you sewists or beginner sewing want to learn how to make this garment, let me know and I can try to make a pattern for it, figure out some grading to do some different sizes with this. But I will definitely be showing a tutorial because I literally think I nailed this. Like, looking at the photos and what was available to view from the movie and just like stock images, I literally can't believe I somehow managed to literally recreate the exact same thing, and I'm so excited for the rest of this project about how it's gonna go. Basically I just need to put in the cuff pieces there and then sew the rest of my side seams with the French seam. Put in the collar, which is might be a little bit challenging to figure out because I did put some facings in here to finish that edge, so I might have to put a bias tape, but I'm gonna see if I can do like some sort of French seam there, but we'll see. And then all I really have to do is sew in my buttons and some snaps, because I realized now after looking up closer images there's actually no buttonholes, and the buttons on the actual garment are decorative, so I don't have to put in any buttonholes, which I'm super stoked about that. We know how that last project went with them buttonholes. And then after that, all I have to do is a beautiful hem and we are finished. Granted, this project looks really easy. There's a lot of things to keep in mind, especially since I've never made a pattern like this before. I should say starting from scratch, essentially. Like, I know the basics of it, but adding all the additional things and trying to hide those with the certain things that I was doing is where it gets really challenging to make sure it still looks movie reproduction, because as a designer of somebody who recreates things, I don't get to see the inside of the garment, so I actually have to figure all that out myself and figure out which seam finishes and facings and linings go into where and how things are constructed, with whether you put interfacing in certain things or not. So really a lot of it is just trial and error, but we do have a really beautifully designed dress right now, and I'm so excited. I'm going to try and wake up early tomorrow morning. this is the finished project as of tonight. Technically tomorrow morning, but we did get the cuffs kind of figured out, and because of my boo-boo, I basically had to redo this whole side, which kind of stinks. But it's looking really great, and I am super excited for how the rest of it's going to turn out. So, bear with me, folks, as we continue on making the notebook dress. All right, so I've pinned my cuffs to the outside of my garment. You can see here, I'm going to be doing a basting stitch at 1/4 inch of a length around the entire circular part here. The reason why I left this unattached here is so that I could attach this without it being interference with the side seam here, because once I fold this in the correct way, I'll show you on this other side here, you can see, because I've already hidden the cuff inside the seam here, which is the finishing part of the sleeve, I will then be able to close this up and it will tuck in all of the excess fabric, and it will be a French seam here so that this will be all sewn in and you won't see any of the stuff on this side. So I'm going to do the exact same thing over here. So after I basted, I folded over my 1/4 inch, and then I folded it again over itself so that the lip of the cuff is hiding inside the seam here, which I then sewed down so that when this folds over, it will fold in on the fold once I press it, and this will be hidden on the inside just like this, and you don't see any of the raw edges. Also, I had already gone and done this, but I already enclosed this seam because it is a French seam, so that the inside is already covered as well, which you can see there. This is a little bit of a thicker area, and this camera does not capture the quality of it as well as it should, but because it's so thick and the way that it was designed, the dress actually, the cuff is hidden inside of the seam here, and it helps it to allow it to stay flipped out on its edge like this. Now this is the first kind of prototype of this dress, which I hope to make a couple more styles of it, but I really am super happy with how this has turned out so far. But that is essentially how I believe the cuff is made, and I probably will even do a little bit of a small tack just up here where it starts so that it stays attached and doesn't flip out on itself. But yeah, that's how I pretty much did the cuff here. Now you can see that I have trimmed this down to a little bit less than like a 1/16 of an inch. That is so that when I flip this over, let me show you here. Here we go. When I flip this over, it'll be hidden on the inside up here. And when I sew it, you won't see my seam allowance because this is a French seam, and so I've sewed the wrong sides together first. Now when I flip this over, my right sides will be together, and this seam here will be hidden on the inside because it'll be pinched, and when I flip it back this way, you won't see this because it'll be inside there. So I'm going to sew that, but first I'm going to press this just to give it a little bit of clean finish here, and that way the
part that I sewed will be as almost taut as possible, that when I flip it, it's exactly going to be at 1/2 inch, because that's how much seam allowance I gave myself. So I did a 1/4 here, and then I'll do a 1/4 here, and that'll be my 1/2 inch. Okay, so after kind of trying to finagle those in there like you can normally do, like just push the seams in there, it wasn't really lining up how I wanted to, so I actually ended up just taking a little bit of the sewing off that I had done on the inside here to connect this, and I just restitched it here. Excuse the little clippings that I still need to clean up, but this actually ended up working way better because this now actually folds in on itself, and when it comes out this way it actually lines up, which is how I want it to be, so that when I next time do this facing, when I fold it over the last time, I will make sure to remember to fold this over the collar portion. That way I can just do a straight sewing line all the way across and get a perfect finish where it needs to get lined up at the end here. After I had resolved the issue with the front facing and the collar, I then moved on to making my own fabric covered buttons, and these were super easy to do. All you do was just measure out the diameter of the fabric with the little plastic piece, and then building the buttons like a sandwich. Fabric goes down first, and then the dome part of the button gets placed in next, and then you kind of just shove all the excess fabric towards the middle, kind of smoothing it out. And then the shank part, that is the very last piece that goes on top, gets pushed down and kind of snapped into place. I think they turned out really beautiful, but my thumbs did hurt because I had to make 20 buttons. But I love them. I will be definitely using this kit again. Alright, so I've got one button sewed on already just to see how I wanted it. And I did go ahead and measure out all the other places where I wanted them. So I'm going to have to sew on 18 buttons. And because this is a simply decorative stitch, I'm going to sew on these clear snaps here. I'm not sure how much I want to use yet, because I don't think it needs to have 18. I think we can strategically place them along the front facing here and have it still be fitted the way I want it to, but I will be back once I sew on 18 different buttons. And then the last thing I also have to do is make a belt, which I have measured out here where this like center of my waistline is, and because my belt is about 1 inch, I have this really pretty kind of decorative belt buckle here, which I will probably remove this dangly thing here because it's not one in the actual movie. And I'm thinking because it'll be centered right in between 2 buttons, it'll be a nice placeholder so that it will stay kind of at the waistline without sagging or falling down. Just because this is like your really simple kind of threaded through belt where it doesn't have a belt loop. So it kind of just gets woven in and then on it goes. So I will also have to make a belt quick, which will be super easy because a belt is simply just a rectangle, a super long rectangle, but I will cut that out and then I'll have to sew that quick and then sew in the snaps and do a hand sewing on the hem here, which I'm going to be doing a nice stitch here, so that way you don't see anything on this nice front side of the dress. So I will be back once I sew all of those things on. So I am going to be sewing on the rest of my buttons today, and then hopefully getting around to making the belt to finish my garment. And then lastly, all I need to do is sew on these little clear snaps, because it is not a functioning button and it doesn't have buttonholes, rather it is purely decorative. So I will be doing lots of hand sewing, so enjoy. And also for this, I'm just going to be using a really thin, you're not gonna be able to see this, but a very thin needle, because this fabric is so lightweight, and I don't want to damage it or create a larger unnecessary hole than I have to. And I'm just going to be making a little loop at the bottom here and then kind of sewing it in place without tying a knot, just because I don't want to have any unnecessary bulk in this area. So basically I go through the back side here, bring my needle up, and you can see my loop is still on the back here. Take my button that I made, go through the end. Now carefully go probably like literally less than a hair's width worth of space, just so you have enough room for the shank to stay. And then I'm going to go through the whole loop here on this side, so it creates kind of a already pre-placed knot, and then just continue sewing as is. And that is how I will be sewing on these buttons. I don't think it needs to have a ton of stabilizing with this, because it's not going to be in function. So I'm just going to sew like normal and try to also hit the exact spot here, as you can see with the previous one. Keep it as close as I can. Okay, so now to finish up, I'm just going to go back through the shank, and then I'm going to carefully kind of wrap just a little bit, not a lot, around the base of it, so that it has a little bit more reinforcement. And then I'm going to go straight back down into the other side that I go down on. And kind of pull that nice and tight there. And then I'm just going to go through underneath some of the stitchings that I made here to really reinforce it, and then just tie off a little knot. Now you get to enjoy me hand sewing at 100 times speed, because these buttons did take me 3 hours to sew on, and I really made sure to be extremely precise with my sewing, just because I don't like the effects that threading buttons on can have when you kind of carelessly sew wherever and you're not really like paying attention to where the thread has entered or departed the fabric. which I also think adds a level of couturness to that. The more precise you are with your hand sewing, the more beautiful I think it is. And the less threads that you can see usually really does make the garment look extremely, extremely well put together. But yeah, I ended up doing a lot of button sewing this day, and I think they turned out absolutely beautifully in the end. I have this much left to do. I have 5 left, and I've done, oh, I don't know, like 13 of these. They're really nice to put on, but they do just take a little while because I do have to measure out exactly where I want it. And then also measure how deep in I should sew it, because I want to make sure that they're all uniform and exact. But I think I'm going to get a little snack quick, because then I'm going to next start on the hem, which I'm just going to do a quick stitch on that, and then I can put on my snaps, and then it'll be finished, and then I'll give it a nice quick press. So I'm going to grab a quick snack really fast and pause this. Alright, all that's left to do on the garment right now in terms of machine sewing is to just do my hem. So I'm just going to fold up 1/2 inch, sew here, and then I'm going to press up another inch, and then I'm going to do some hand sewing very delicately so that I don't catch more than I need, and then that will be my hem. Alright, so I've done my little stitch at the top here to reinforce my 1/2 inch. Now I'm just going to fold up 1 inch here, and then press this down, and then do some hand sewing up here. That way I don't get a traditional stitch on the back that you would see for like your commercial garments. I want this to be still very high end, so I'm going to do a hand stitching here. And then okay, so I've just finished my hem. I actually did a small catch stitch. It does not look as after I had pressed up my fabric a 1/2 inch, I did do a quick edge stitching, as you can see here, before I finished rolling it up again, 1 inch, to then hand sew it together. Nothing on the side, so you can't even tell, like very barely. Once I give this a press and kind of smooth out like just that tiny little hole, that you can kind of see where the thread is pulling to keep it together. That is where my stitch is. And when you do this kind of stitch, you should really only be gathering like 1 thread, maybe even like a partial little even tinier thread within that bigger thread, so that you're really just catching like literally nothing, as you can see on the back here. If I flip it completely over, you can't even tell that I've done a stitch unless you're really looking at it. See, like right there, maybe I got caught a little bit too much, but if I just kind of smooth that out with my nail, it gets a little bit less visible. But see, even from far away, you can't even tell because I've caught so little of that. So I went out and cut 2 equal length strips that are 2 inches wide, because I'm making a 1 inch belt for this piece here. This inner center is only 1 inch long, so I have 1/2 inch of seam allowance on this side, and this belt is 36 inches around my waist. That gives a little bit extra just for some breathing room. So I'm going to go ahead and sandwich these 2 pieces together. I don't think I'm going to add a interfacing to this, just because I didn't like how the interfacing originally turned out on the other pieces. I thought it was just a little bit too bulky. That being said, you definitely could add a interfacing to this, but because I don't want it to be stiff, I'm just going to sandwich the two pieces together, and I think that'll be plenty enough once it's folded in on itself and has the seam allowance kind of as a reinforcement. I think that'll be plenty enough to kind of support that. So I'm going to go ahead and sandwich these together and sew them up.
Okay, I literally think I finished all of the snaps on the dress. That took a lot of sewing, a lot of hand sewing, lots of hand sewing, because there are literally two sides to this. I'm going to try it on just to make sure that everything fits well, and then I'm going to see what I need to do for these ones, because I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put like one snap on the back side of here, that way it can connect here and stay straight, and then also maybe two on this side so that it also stays together, because I don't want to like see like the underneath of it. I want it to be pretty crisp and straight, so I'm just gonna probably put on like two more, maybe three more, and hopefully that'll be the last of these snaps, and then I'll be done, which will be super exciting. So I'm gonna go try this on real quick.